Hi, Bentley.
Hey, Marc-Antoine, how are
So
you?
gentil. As usual, too many things are happening, but it's good. Worked, of course, been working on some society library stuff, which we won't mention here.
Yeah.
Starting to rethink about next steps for SenseCraft and for hyperknowledge, because this also needs to move and I need to balance my time. And where we're going with all that. I don't know if we have a CDL agenda, and let's see who shows up. Do you have?
I definitely don't have an agenda. I haven't even gone any farther based on the UI discussion we had last week. So
Right. There is a discussion we should have about a richer reason score, one that, you know, does make the distinction between reasons that are correlated, not correlated, necessary, sufficient, different motivations that can add up versus reasons to believe that, where you just take the max and all that we were discussing last time.
yeah, is your intuition and experience of that say that that is a finite known domain? I guess that's two questions. Is it finite? Is it well trotted, kind of known? Is it, I mean, it's just kind of like a lot of it is just standard. Algebra is the wrong word. What's it called when you there's all the different booleans and everything? There's a term for it.
It's in a way, okay, there are theories that pretend to have covered the territory. Okay. In which case we could just apply those theories and we'd have something. Among other things, Bayesian inference is extremely useful, and I think the work that was it Carl, I think, did something on Bayesian.
Yeah, beliefs. I think so.
And that was very well done, and that's totally appropriate. And it's not necessarily easy to quantify now, but it's usable. And there's a whole field of logic that looks at weighing decisions. There's a whole decision support theory, then that's pretty well defined and well trodden. So that way I'd be tempted to say yes.
Yeah.
I'm a likely.
Bit. Yeah.
What?
Or likely it's well trodden. Yeah.
The decision support field is really well trodden, actually. But it does assume that everything is well defined. And what to do when things are not well defined, and now that gets much more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And much more intractable on the one hand. But again, how can we give useful representations of decision factors when things are fuzzy? And people know they're fuzzy. We don't have an exact percentage. What we have is, you know, fuzzy beliefs and reasons to believe, and we're not even agreeing on what we're talking about, but here is what we know, and here's what's unclear, and here's let's at least name the fuzziness. We can do that, and that's useful. And there, of course, it's not, and part of that is well trodden in formal concept analysis. Actually, I haven't seen people do both. Do the formal concept analysis to identify where is the concept fuzzy, and then apply, say, Bayesian or formal logic to that. That I don't think has been done.
Well, there hasn't been much on fuzzy concepts, right? I mean, you're tackling ground on that. Have you found?
What you have is formal concept analysis, which is about defining concepts to death. It's not about fuzziness, but it's about identifying what are the criteria really well. And in a way, it's what I do, right? I'd say I'd add a more dynamic analysis
Yeah.
to formal concept analysis.
Progressive.
But
Yeah.
otherwise, I think the concepts of formal concept analysis are perfectly relevant. I just want to make it a bit more dynamic. Again, formal concept analysis is, let's do the mathematical analysis after the fact, after we've asked everybody all the questions and yada, yada, yada. Making it more dynamic is a really interesting open problem, but it's incremental. Doesn't require a revolution. Mixing that with other layers like Bayesian, I don't know if it's being solved. I don't know if it's difficult. It seems doable, but
I just don't think anyone's gone down that path yet.
exactly.
Just hasn't come up yet.
But what is clear is that even formal concept analysis, the visualizations suck. Representing lattices is hard.
Yeah.
It's an expert problem, and making that palatable to outsiders is an interesting open UX problem. That's something I find important, because getting people to understand nuance is something I want to work on. And there's this whole, why do we believe this, and making a catalog of epistemic patterns. And again, some of that exists more in terms of known epistemic anti-patterns, so-called cognitive biases. That's well cataloged. There's the work of Walton, perfectly well cataloged on also valid and defeasible reasoning. Beautiful work. Making that more mainstream and getting people to slowly get a grasp on it. And the slowly is important. I don't think we can deal just with experts, because it's a huge body of knowledge and not everybody will ever learn all of those patterns. But getting people to realize, okay, well, here's this reasoning. And by the way, somebody with expertise tagged, well, this is the issue with that reasoning, or this is why this reasoning is believable. And if you're curious, here's the structure, and you can, if you're interested, learn the structure, or just trust the expert, because,
I just came across a new kind of domain where that's used in when you're looking at studies. Gosh, I can't remember the name now. It's Brachyam or something like that. But a guy came up with like 9 criteria that you look at to see whether the correlation is likely to be causal or not.
Well,
that was an interesting domain specific kind of heuristic.
Not correlated to Joshua Pearl's work on causality.
The name that they mentioned definitely wasn't Pearl.
Okay.
So, but it could be related. It was on a podcast. It was an aside. A guy saying, everyone should learn how to read a little bit of scientific literature, not like be steeped in it, but be able to like read something and kind of understand what's going on. And he was talking about, one of the big things is that, looking at understanding when correlation is likely to be causation. And
yes.
so he mentioned a name, and he mentioned a few of the criteria that you use. Like, one of them is there a expected method for there to be causation in there, right? If there's not one there, then it's less likely to be actually correlated.
Well,
the things that you can't do
sometimes the mechanism is unknown, but yes, you're right that it certainly requires more evidence if you don't know the mechanism.
Yeah. So that would be something interesting to also put in our scoring systems. And I think there's a lot of things like that I think should be kind of like template driven. I don't like hard coding those into the systems.
Total agreement.
I want it to be like, and that's why Reason Score doesn't have any of that, but you could always put labels on it, and people could put in this is a straw man argument or something like that. We could have tags for it, but I don't, in a lot of the other systems, that's expressly put in the relationships. And they have a specific taxonomy, and I'd prefer all that to be meta.
I want both, in the sense that I do want it to be possible for people to add templates. That's kind of part of the work I want to do now whenever I have time on SenseCraft, making this into a growable template library. But I do want to start a visual language on, hey, this is application of this template, and this is application of this template, and let's try to make it so people can learn to recognize this is what this looks like, and creating a visual language of the most common patterns, at least.
It might be interesting to do a survey of different, either domain specific, rational, I don't know what to call them, pattern languages or whatever. And then also different processes for, so I think a Bayesian is different because that's a general kind of mathematical, a single stratification of how to quantify things. But then that other one that says when you're looking at a study, these are the things you look for to see whether it's good. And also not in that list, but also when you're looking at a study in general, is like, was it a random control trial? Can you do a random control trial on it? Because maybe you can't. And so I don't even know if it's logically better that, say, if you can't do a random control trial, should you weigh it higher, or should that not matter on the weighing? And that's something I haven't figured out in my own head on how I weigh things. You know,
No, it's absolutely valid.
But just do a document of all the different ways that people analyze data.
That's really interesting, because I'm aware of a lot of the generic schemas. I named Walton and cognitive biases, but having domain-specific schemas and seeing which ones are used in different domains would definitely be useful, because I'm sure that different domains have, oh, we always use this pattern, we always use that pattern, and these are the ones you need to know if you're in that field.
Yeah.
And there may be shortcuts or condensed patterns because some of the domain knowledge is baked into the schema application. And saying it's a more generic version of that schema because we know this in this domain, in this domain.
And I'm not sure I'd want to go too deep in any specific domain, but like stuff that would be useful, like reading. How do you read a study, a paper?
You're aware of the work of Mike Caulfield?
Yeah, yeah.
I mentioned it many times, the SIFT method.
Oh, one other thing about like biases and fallacies.
Yeah.
Names for those are just horrific as far as like training and understanding. It's like, oh, I got to memorize all this stuff because we named it the True Scotsman. Yeah, that's a helpful term. I like that. I think of a drunk guy playing golf, but
the no true Scotsman fallacy.
No True Scotsman, right? The No True Scotsman, right? See, I can't even remember it. It completely goes out of my head 5 minutes after. Like I read the definition, okay, I got it. 5 minutes later, I'm like, because it's like I want to take them all and give a 1 or 2, 3 word title that is what they are. I love the classifications where people were grouping them in different ways. I think that's very helpful. But then you also wonder how many of them are subtle variations on another one, which the classification and grouping kind of helped with. But I still feel like there's a lot of work there to re-taxonomize fallacies. And
I really think Walton has done that work well.
I don't know if that's the one I don't think that was the one I was looking at.
There's who else did good work on? There's been classification of cognitive bias, which is different.
The two names that come to my mind from my PhD research was Reed and Walton.
Was Walton, was that biases or fallacies? That was biases.
Fallacies.
Right? Fallacies.
You know the cognitive bias codex.
Yeah, right. So I love that. But looking through that, I realized how it's taking a bad taxonomy and cleaning it up, a
Yep.
bad naming convention, and organizing it. But I'm like, I'd like to go a level deeper, which someone may have done, but and rename them now that we know how they all relate.
The one problem, I really don't like these. Okay, not that I don't like, they're useful. But the fallacy thing really annoys me because it's very good for mudslinging. Like it gets people to say, oh, this is flawed, this is flawed, this is flawed. And the one book that really influenced me at one point is a book in French, unfortunately, about that deconstructs the whole corpus of known fallacies and shows that each of them is actually a heuristic. So if you claim that it proves anything, you're wrong. But if it claims it's a reason to believe, it's actually not necessarily bad. And if you say this is a fallacy, you're in accusatory kind of for against mode, as opposed to let's try to come to a common understanding and let's look at the evidence together. If you think of them as heuristics, the feasible heuristics, and this is really what Walton did well. He said, here's a argumentation scheme. Some people use this scheme, and here are the ways in which this scheme can be wrong. And there's he calls them angle. I don't remember the term he uses, but think angle of attack. But that doesn't mean that it's always wrong. It's just if somebody uses this scheme, these are ways in which this scheme could be wrong. Doesn't mean it is. It's just here are known weaknesses of using that heuristic. Doesn't mean the heuristic is not wrong. It can be
right.
It can mislead you, but applying the heuristic in itself is a thing you do, and you realize it's heuristic, and it's not a proof. That's important.
Yeah, it's funny. In a similar vein, I keep seeing all these like best practices. People on LinkedIn have like, oh, you need to do this, and I'm like, you should not give someone generic advice until you tell them where the boundaries are. This works for businesses over this size, right? It's just like, it's a fundamental error in how people communicate and think.
Yep,
It's just like
absolutely.
everywhere.
That's what I loved when I read the Gang of Four design pattern book. I don't know if you read that.
Right. Yeah.
Forces.
They really.
This pattern is good for this use case, and it's when you're balancing this with that, you'd consider that. But maybe if this is more important, then maybe you'd consider that instead.
Always trade-offs. Yeah.
Yeah, it made it very clear it's a trade-off, and that was lovely.
And the other rule is people need to never use infinitives, which I just did. But I'm so tired of people saying that's impossible. I'm like, you don't have direct evidence that there's no possible way that could be done. You were saying it's very, very, I was watching actually something you were in, I can't remember, Fellowship of the Link or something like that. Someone's like, it's impossible. I said, no, it's just very, very expensive. We can do it. If we wanted to put enough resources, if we want to do, World War II mobilization on it, we could do it. But we're not going to do that. And then the more we reduce the cost of doing that through computers or automation or logic, or makes that more and more feasible, and we get more and more of it done. Anyways, I think this just became a complaint session by me, but
no. I mean, these are real. This is exactly what we want thought patterns to look like. It's saying this is applicable in those cases. This is not applicable in those cases. These are the known weaknesses, yada, yada, yada. Again, this is what Walton did really well. Now, being able to annotate a conversation map or a concept, a debate map, or an argument with these kinds of, this is using these heuristics. Here are the limits of the heuristics, and this is why the heuristic is useful, and these are the standards of proof that were used for this. As a mathematician, one book I read that was absolutely fascinating was a book by Imre Lakatos on proof and refutation. And it takes one basic theorem, I think it was Euler's theorem about number of faces and edges and vertices in a polyhedron. And here's the original proof. And it was considered good enough at time t, and then people realized, oh yes, but, and then they improved the proof, and okay, now it's rigorous, and then standards of what makes a proof rigorous changed, and then it had to be rewritten. And he went like over 5 iterations of this. It's absolutely fascinating, the notion of what's considered a solid proof in mathematics, which is supposed to be the gold standard of proof, right? But even there, the notion of what was rigorous evolved continuously over time.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely fascinating. And when we're taking, and we know, and this is really in UX terms also, like I was having this conversation, Jack, I was having this conversation with Sony. We were speaking about, oh, should we get LLMs to do a kind of executive summary of a crowdsourced conversation for deciders, right? And I'm like, on the one hand, I see the point of that, and it's useful, and this is totally something that the LLM can do well, and why not? On the other hand, I really want to define people with authority to decide to look at the whole graph, because the if you get the LLM to do an executive summary, it's what can be understood quickly, and it's going to leave out some of the, oh, we didn't take that route because, or we eliminated that idea because, and there's a kind of, what are the edge cases? Whenever you make it digestible by one person as either a curated view of a map or a text, it's, okay, this is how much you understand. But with a map, it's easier to have so-called footnotes saying, by the way, this is contested, and by the way, this is why we choose that, as opposed to that other argument. And you don't have to show it, but you can have a kind of signal saying, here are all the other branches that you could look at if you're not sure about this part. And if you think it's missing something, which will necessarily be left out when you try to be synthetic. But being able to say, this is also there. Now, you can do it with hypertext, like Jamie's papers is an interesting fractal summary.
Mm-hmm.
But the notion that you need a visual language to say, state of knowledge is this. Here, well, this one's contentious, and there's other things that we eliminated, but maybe you do want to look at them if you don't feel sure. As opposed, and there's no space to put them all because that makes a document illegible. But knowing they're there or not is important. And being able to go from, I have a nagging feeling about this one, what was left out and why?
Yep.
And this is a visual language. That's a visual language question. Making a view that's curated, synthetic, understandable, but says we drew an edge around what couldn't be understood in one session, and there's that much outside of that edge.
Yeah. From your thinking about the different type of maths that, not types of maths, but
yeah, mathematical
calculations within like
systems.
reason scores really naive right now. I'm trying to think of what's the next most important one. Like I feel like the one I'm tackling, which is just, you know, you have multiple things of weights and they're averaged together, is I think the most common case in the debates?
Well, have a look at Delphi at least. The idea is there's multiple criterion and there's multiple and there's degrees of uncertainty and there's degrees of impact. There was this great work by, let me find this. God, I haven't revisited that in ages. Social. Social Decision Support System by Murray Turoff, but that's not the one I want, but at least it gave me the name Murray Turoff. Collaborative discourse structures, I think that's, yes, that's the one. Okay, is the URL still valid? Or can I find it easily? That's just a good is that the PDF? Yeah, that's the PDF. Copy link. That's a good starter article. Oof. Oh well. No, I don't want the Google URL. Damn you. I want the ResearchGate URL. Sorry. Okay, so that's usable. This goes into a not that complicated model, but it's multifactorial. It has collective input, but it separates factors. And I'd add a multi-criterion dimension to it, but at least it distinguishes feasibility, validity. There's a nice little separation of things in there. God, it's been a while. Measures and actions and stuff like that. So it's a good little paper. Simple model, but nicely done. But I should get what's a good reference on decision support system, because there's books on this. And that's books and software and existing stuff, but they are those software are very much sold expensive and sold to corporations. I don't know how much they're used by corporations. But Turoff was involved in the Delphi method. So this is informed by Delphi. So it's worth reading.
Yeah, just with the time I'm spending, like you say, simple, but I have to like get out of my headspace that I'm in and step in another one. And
yeah, this article is not obscure or difficult. And I really look at what Tetlock is doing, but Tetlock is basically, it's interesting because he's getting his super forecasters basically to share heuristics. So they're creating this private bank of heuristics. And I think this is really, if you're thinking defeasible reasoning, and again, this Walton is the reference for that. Getting people to label the heuristics, why do we believe that? I think is extremely important. Like what I'd want is, this is a voting system, right? It's like, well, it's cool, I believe in it, but we don't know why. And for me, that's really important. Like if you have a vote, if you say, this is probably high impact, this is probably high probability, why do you believe that? What's the pattern? And this is where you get into, for me, concept analysis, right? Oh, I think this is believable because we have this current situation, and I think it could lead to that. And you have a scenario. And then somebody else comes and says, well, I see other features of the situation that remind me of this other situation that led to that. So here's the pattern I see, because I'm picking on different facets of the current situation. And doing a kind of, and this is where I do formal concept analysis. What are the facets, and what facets are significant to say that this or that is likely? What absolutely is beyond me, Bentley, is this was all invented in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It was used by governments for a while, but they used it internally. And that means people never saw it. People that weren't exposed to it. And so that kind of analysis got replaced by talking points, which necessarily simplify the problem. And this is why I say there is totally a UX problem of how to show this to people in a way that people can understand these are the options, this is why we think this is a good idea, and this is the evidence. And there's an information literacy problem that is, in a way, prior to the political problem. Politicians used to use this shit, except because they didn't involve the public in it. Oh, it's for us experts. It didn't happen. I've seen, I remember people telling me, people who are familiar with the sausage factory, telling me about, hey, look, this decision we knew wasn't the best, but it's the one we could sell because whatever, that was too complicated for people. The other option, which we knew was the best, felt too complicated for people. So let's use something simpler, easier to explain, and that'll fly. So there's really a public aspect to all this. So yeah, UX matters. So Jack left us. It's two of us. I don't know if you want me to add anything to what I've said, but
No, I'm just, like you, I'm sure on time, so I'm weighing. I kind of want to, I'm still kind of leaning toward, rather than expanding the scope of what I can handle, which I know I'm eventually going to do. Although I may hit on, necessary but not sufficient, or sufficient, in the current debate that I'm looking at. So if I hit that, I'll have to handle it. But I kind of want to, I still feel like the best use of time is to pull in some data and build out the logic system as I hit it, just while I'm experimenting, and then later on do a more exhaustive search. Because the concept of having something that that has a scoring system but has no voting is still kind of like maybe a fool's errand, so until I kind of prove that out, spending a lot of time perfecting it, when there could be a blocker in there that makes
there
it
is
useless.
voting in your system.
No, not really. It depends on what you mean by voting.
Yeah,
You add in a piece of evidence. I'm calling evidence now, but it's a pro or a con, and it changes the score. So voting's not a core piece of what I'm exploring. At some point, it'd be nice to add voting to find out the areas that people disagree on and the areas that need to be explored more. But the core experiment is, can we have a system that is a Or is there value in a system that where it's a tabula rasa? And so it's just keeping a score of the reasons that have been suggested so far. And then the humans affect the score by changing.
I'll be blunt, I don't believe it. I believe it's, for example, think of how does it behave under disinformation attack? Like
No,
this is,
no, it's not. That's not within the scope of
well,
what I care about. There's no information attack when it's a group of trusted people working together to come to a decision. You know what I'm saying? That the attack vectors and stuff like that, that's only some circumstances, and that's not.
Okay, but what I'm saying is even if it's trusted people, it's very tempting to just, I mean, people do it all the time. They'll just reformulate a slight variant of what if they really believe and they're right about this, they'll give different formulations and they're not even aware that it's equivalent because they're just trying to make the claim again and again, and you'll have multiplication of arguments.
But that's like saying I shouldn't use Excel because someone could go in there and type in bad numbers. It's kind of like Excel is still useful. I have a group of people working on an account, and someone could go in there and just type in a whole bunch of crap numbers, and it's like that's not a reason not to use Excel.
No, what I'm saying is, I don't know what you mean by trusted people, but I can totally see a case where you've got somebody with a conspiracy theory who comes up with a total bullshit argument, or somebody who's just a bit weird, and you need to know that the rest of the group thinks this is a bullshit argument.
No, that's not a use case I'm looking at.
All right. That's
like I'm looking at the core. I'm at the position of a ruler, and this is a core fundamental atomic way of measuring what we know. It's even if it doesn't ever go past that, it would still it'd still be a useful tool. And I think I don't see that we'll ever make progress if every exploration has to handle the putting something out on the internet, or some tools.
That's fair. Okay, you don't want the crowdsourced attack vector. That's fine. That's understandable totally. But I do think you cannot just abstract away idiocy in an argument tool.
No, but in this case, it's there's a record of it, and there is a there's a way to combat it, and it's reducing the asymmetries. So in a situation like this, if you're not allowed to enter another claim on your side till the other person has, if you're taking turns adding an evidence or a claim or a reason, then it's at least it's a 1-to-1, right? I can combat your claim when you come in. I'm actually thinking of having 2 moves. That way someone can't really even unintentionally
you're getting close to SenseGraph territory here.
Yeah. No, it definitely has a lot of overlap with it.
And my decision was giving up on scoring in a way, not giving up absolutely, but I'm doing a kind of no, not punting. Well, I haven't worked on it in a while, but delegating to the players, doing a kind of balderdash logic. Get people to vote for the best decision by the other teams. You need at least 3 teams for this to work, but give people a token and say, okay, what's the best move by one of the other teams?
Yeah.
And that way, your ability to convince others becomes relevant. Yeah. Now, of course, there's issues with collusion, this, that. And I'm not saying anything is ever pure and free, but saying I'm trusting the players to do the scoring more than an absolute number.
Yeah,
It's,
I guess the
it's
thing,
very much a Zen and the art of motorcycle maintenance
Right.
type of decision. What is quality?
yeah. The goal of the score and reason score is mostly to combat human memory limitations. I can give a really good argument, but if I give 10 of them, they're going to forget them, several of them.
Right.
So just having a thing to where when I add the argument, the score changes, it kind of it expands the size that the argument can go. Because after a certain point, humans are having to use heuristics to keep up with the data.
But yeah, and here I'm more tempted by classic defeasibility, right? You're saying if there's a single counter argument, it's off, and if you want to counter that, you give a counter argument, and so on. But the idea is at least one argument, and zero undefeated counter argument. Because and here that's more the max logic than the sum logic. As I said, the sum logic works when there's something that has multiple impacts. It doesn't work as well when there's multiple reasons to believe something.
Well, I think most of the debates that I'm thinking about, they have multiple impacts. So like if we're doing something on, well, the one we're doing is on, is keto going to give people heart attacks? Well, there's 50 studies that make this claim, 50 studies that make this claim. So we're doing a meta-analysis of studies is a lot of it. So that's like, well, this, so that's not.
No, but that's not
If
multiple.
one study says it's true, that's not,
No, but that's multiple. Okay. That is multiple reasons to believe a single impact. It's not multiple impact. Like if you said keto might affect your likelihood of getting a heart attack, and it might, it's supposed to help your fat, and it's supposed to have negative impact on your kidney, and it's supposed, that's multiple impact.
Okay,
right?
we're using impact differently than I was thinking of it. I'm talking about, is this statement true?
Yeah. No, but what I'm saying is some makes sense when there's multiple impact in the way I've said it. I don't think some has that much meaning in the sense of multiple studies. In many cases, not all cases, of course, if it's 50 small studies, what you probably want to do is pinch your nose, assume the methodologies are comparable, and add the results from all the studies. Because there's bigger studies and smaller studies, and what you want to know is to make a meta-analysis that gives you a bigger sample size by adding up all the studies. And the weight is the sample size.
Well, except these studies, aren't.
No, of course, that's, as I said,
even
hold your nose and
comparable.
pretend that.
No,
Yeah,
but it's saying that keto raises cholesterol, but then keto, there's a study of people that eat higher fat, right? Those are two uncomparable studies, but they all both impact on does it cause heart disease?
Right. They both affect the believability. Yeah. And what I'm saying is, in many of those cases, in many, not all, certainly not, and I'm maybe not in that case, but in many cases, there is one killing argument either way.
I haven't seen that. Or even if there is, that can be put into the system by putting arguments to weight. So you can say these arguments are less important than this argument. So that argument then becomes the killing one.
And that's called voting.
No, because you're making a claim that it's doing that. It's not individual people. People don't have individual quotes on whether that claim has an effect. You put the claim in, it brings down the score unless someone defeats it. So you say, this study that was a random controlled trial over 10 years of people randomly assigned diets, which would never happen. That one is, we're saying that's more important than this correlation study, done on people in the Mediterranean.
Right.
If someone says that this one's more important than that one, the only way for someone to change that is to say, oh, it's not because. So
Got it. So that way you are doing the feasibility reasoning, but you're very much using the pure defeasibility Dong's model. Fair.
yeah, probably. But it is thinking about it differently. I mean, it's just moving some of the logic into, I don't know, implicit's the wrong word, but it's more into to where things are positioned and how things are attacked, rather than explicitly saying, this one is, which is a negative thing to how it works, because it means there's less kind of explicitly coded, but it's more in how you use it. But there's but that allows for a simpler model, and I think a more intuitive model when people see it. I don't know. I'm going down a rabbit hole. That's not really important.
Legibility is important. Yeah, I'm not convinced that the number means anything. The question is defeated or not. Now, in some cases, it's more complicated, but.
Oh, but how defeated, right? Is anything ever 100%?
No, but in the defeasibility model, yes. But I don't believe in the defeasibility model, but I'd have voting for weights. Like, for me, an argument that only one person believe doesn't have the same weight as an argument that 50% people believe. It's that simple.
But does it matter who believes in it, as opposed to if you had the reasons why they believed in it or don't believe in it? I mean, they don't know their reasons.
No, I see what you're saying. I expect people to introduce noise, to introduce nonsense arguments, and to clog the system with bullshit. And that's why, for me, it is important to, and it's very easy to generate bullshit. Like, generating bullshit is more work than refuting bullshit. It's a kind, there's an entropy thing there.
Yeah.
And that means only relying on people taking the time to defeat bullshit arguments. I don't know that it will scale in an.
Well, I mean, that's where we are today. It just doesn't work.
Correct.
So at least having a record of it is a step closer. But also, yeah, but if you that's where, potentially limiting the speed of the input reduces that asymmetry of ease of, it's reduces it. But that's also, that's not a main thing I'm worried about tackling
Anyway,
at the moment.
I think I see what you're saying. It makes sense up to a point.
Yeah.
It
doesn't solve all the issues. Yeah.
No, it doesn't.
And I'm not even sure that it will work. And that's why I don't want to put a lot of work into it. I'm trying to do the smallest experiment to prove it won't work.
Yeah. What I'm thinking is, if there's a pro that's very disputed, what's its weight? Does it still count as a pro? Or
no, if there's a, as the as the confidence score, which I guess I'm trying to think of what call that in debate map, as confidence go down, its weight, its impact goes down as well.
Right.
So at the point that if
So it
it's
is
fully
recursive
defeated,
that
it
way.
has no weight.
Yep.
And then in theory, it could go the other way, but I don't let things automatically. If something's proved false, it doesn't automatically flip. You just make a separate claim.
Which I think is fine, because yeah, it's sometimes, like for example, if a counter argument is false, it's not evidence for, it's just evidence against the counter argument.
Yeah, it's very semantically dependent, and so I decided not to allow the system to do that automatically. Just
I think that's right. I think that's the right call.
at least in the short term, until we know better when to. Actually, I do have the flag in there, so I can set it to where something will auto flip, but it defaults off.
Good. No, I think that's the right call. Okay.
Yeah, we've
Yeah,
almost spent an hour gabbing.
Yeah, can I ask you a tech question?
Sure.
Have you seen people do CSS animation on HTML tables? As in, I'd like to flip 2 rows or flip 2 columns and have an animation on that.
I mean, you could do it with CSS Grid.
Right.
The difference between, well, no, there isn't. I was going to say the difference between grid and table is that table actually has like the columns will auto size to the content.
Yep.
So that's one of the things you lose in CSS Grid, but Grid does have solid columns that are consistent among all the rows.
Yeah.
You could definitely do that with Grid. You might be able to do it with tables.
No, that was the technical question. Fair enough. But yeah, it makes better sense to use Grid, I guess.
Yeah, Grid's a little
And
painful, but
I know it makes sense to me. I wonder if I could, yeah. D3 pretty much always works with SVG, right? I wonder if I could make it work with.
it works with HT. Well,
Yeah, it does work with HTML. You can do.
yeah. And it works with Canvas too, but.
Yeah, I hate Canvas.
I just don't know, because you think of D3, it's not usually things in order. They're usually on a scale, they're an X or Y coordinate, and you're looking more for this one is now greater than that one, more of a positioning.
It's a
So
scale,
I don't know
guess.
Yeah.
Would be interesting.
I don't know if I'd reach for D3 on that.
I like the declarative aspect of D3, and I like the animations, right?
Yeah.
The declarative animations are cool, but is there something else that does that more in the HTML, CSS space? Declarative animations?
Well, all the frameworks have something built in.
Fair enough.
So if you're using React or Svelte or something like that, there's a way to do that. So like React is the one I'm most familiar with, is I would actually change the order of the items in the array. And I think if I have it set up properly, I think they will move. But it's very framework dependent.
Right.
I don't know of a non-framework solution for that, but there probably is one. There's probably, there's an NPM package for everything. But I'm not aware of any.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah,
I'm
but I do
thinking,
think React animations would automatically handle it. If you reorder an array, it would just move things around to the right place.
Okay.
And have things, if they are new, kind of grow in depending on what animation you set.
Interesting. Thank you. That's useful.
Sure. And feel free to hit me up anytime. Or if you want to schedule a meeting, bentleydavis.com/meet, or just go to the page.
Yeah. It's been a
Always
while
happy to
since
dedicate an hour or so for free.
It's been a while since I've done serious CSS work. I do basic stuff, but
It's changed a lot in the last year or two. So
I know that's exactly why I'm asking the questions.
I mean, I can't keep up with it. And it's my day job. Yep. Hit me up anytime.
That's the web in general, right?
Yes. It's accelerating. It's still accelerating, and it will. It's just getting crazy.
You saw there was this amazing caricature once about web development. What is it? Well, let's see if I can find it.
I do search engine driven development. I just search for it. And I'm gonna try the AI stuff too. I did a little bit.
I'll find it. It was a caricature about somebody digging a pit, and the goal of digging is to keep digging, and how it's the endless churn of front end frameworks. You say it's accelerating. There was actually a time when it was worst. Like the early React days were absolutely terrible, I find.
I was an Angular at that point.
But yeah, but precisely, I mean, it was Angular or React or this or that, and Ember.
Yeah. Although now I think there's been a recent explosion, and I think
Yes,
we're about at the same number of competing frameworks.
Absolutely.
And React is what Angular used to be at that time.
Yep.
It's hard to know who's gonna win the next phase, whether it's gonna be, could be Svelte, could be Quick, could be.
I don't know, Quick. I've looked at Svelte. I had a small thing to do recently, and I picked on a very unknown framework, but I liked it because it compiled to web components. It's not the only one that did it, but it was minimal compiles to web components. Yes, I'll use that.
Yeah. The neat thing about Quick is that they do hydration on the client. So on most of the other frameworks these days, they'll send HTML to the client, but for it to animate it, it has to regen all the HTML.
Right.
This
Which is
one,
ridiculous.
Yeah. So in Quick, they send the HTML to the server, and it has the functions calls hardlined in the HTML. So then you can then click a button, and it'll actually download the code for that button after you click it. But it's fast enough because it's just it's very little.
Yeah,
code.
it's minimal. Yeah. Interesting.
There might be some situations where you're pre-downloaded, but in theory, you're shipping HTML that doesn't require a rebuild step.
Cute.
Yeah.
No, interesting. And I could see a point where you could make those into, there's this distinction in HTML where you can say load it now or load it after you're done loading the page, but preemptively load after you're done loading the page, and this would be a good use of that. I'll have a look at Quick. It was Riot I used. I was happy with it.
Oh, I don't think I've even seen that one when you.
It's not a big player, but it was minimal, compiles to web component, sold.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I'll see you next time at our weekly Just You and Me meetings.
Yeah, really. Ciao, ciao.